Everyone, and a very warm welcome to our morning workshop. Before we begin, let me share a few quick announcements with you. All of you are requested to keep your mobile phones on silent mode. We'll encourage you to keep wearing masks throughout the conference, please. With that, let me introduce the topic of today's workshop: building endearing products through storytelling and design thinking. Please join me in welcoming our speaker for this session, Kuru Subramaniam, Director of Product Management Retail at Publicis Sapient. Kuru is a diverse professional with background spanning over product strategy and thought leadership. He has also led innovation and digital transformation consulting engagements with leading global retailers. So, a round of applause for Kuru, and over to you, please.
Thank you. Thanks. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's workshop. When I started preparing for this, I asked how the seating will be, right? So they said it'll be like rows. So there started my first challenge of design thinking, right? How do I engage all of you in design thinking when the seating is like this, right? But that's why we have design thinking. So today we'll be covering how do we build really good products, right? Using storytelling and design thinking, right? A little bit more about myself. I graduated in 2001. I had an engineering degree specializing in supply chain. Worked in different places, started with automotive, went into supply chain, and then went into retail in 2007. I started with Tesco. I was with Tesco for around 7 years. I was a senior product owner, worked in different aspects, but that's where I learned the ropes of retail, right? I know many of you are from different backgrounds, so I'll try to give retail examples, but really it can be used across industries, right? And then I joined Accenture in 2017, and I led the retail innovation team there, and did a lot of proof of concepts, design thinking. Right now, I'm Director of Product Management in Publicis Sapient, and we do a lot of these day in and day out for our clients, right? What you see here is the design thinking bus, right? So, interestingly, Accenture was wondering how to engage clients who come in from the airport in Bangalore to their office, like a 2-hour drive, right? So we applied design thinking and we came up with a design thinking bus, right? So in the 2-hour commute, we would do design thinking, right? If you're wondering at 2 a.m. what design thinking are we going to do with our clients, it was for clients who had already landed in Delhi or Bombay and were coming to Bangalore, right? And we'll cover this later because I'm going to talk about it a little bit more, right? Today, I'd like to cover broadly aspects on how you empathize with users, right, with your customers. Also with your employees, because users are not just your external customers, but also internal, right? And how do you enable, more importantly, and please note the word enable, a culture of innovation and customer centricity into your organization. And more importantly, how do you measure, are you doing well, right? Which is really, really hard, right? So I'll give you some tips based on my experience. Let's start with a fun activity because, I think it's important, especially to calm my nerves. So we'll start with a fun activity. You all have a pen and a paper or a pencil and a paper, right? So this is the best I could do so far, but hopefully it'll be fun. So what I'd like you to do is design a helmet, right? So let's start, just sketch. You don't have to be a great artist. I'm the worst artist in the world, but try to design a helmet that comes to your mind. And once you've drawn it, right, let me know. But you only have 30 seconds, right? And your time started 30 seconds ago. Just kidding. You have 30 seconds. Try to draw or sketch a helmet. Shouldn't take long. You've seen helmets, right? Anyone here who hasn't seen a helmet? No? Good, okay. I was wondering what to select, so it's just completely random. There's no meaning behind it. Good question, but let's start with drawing a helmet first. You're asking the right questions, you're on the right track. You're 10 steps ahead of me. Okay. If you've drawn, I want you to look at your neighbors and see how similar or different it is. Right? So if you haven't drawn it, you're in trouble because your neighbors are going to check. Right? Similar, different. No, you're not going to draw. Okay, you're not going to participate. Oh, you are. Exactly the same. You did copy? No. I see some people settling in. So the activity, the fun activity is to draw a helmet. Okay? And since you came 20 seconds late, you have only 10 seconds. Right? And you have to show it to your neighbor. They'll check if you've drawn. If both of you haven't drawn, then I can't help it. Right? So how does your helmet look? Okay. I've left this blank only in textbooks, but also in my presentations. Did it look similar? Yeah? Not at all? Oh, you drew the side view. Brilliant. I love it. I love it. I love it. Side view. Beautiful. Too embarrassing in the front. Any of you draw any of these other helmets? Yes? You did? Which one was it? This? Okay. Cricket, sporting helmet. Anyone drew this? Iron Man's helmet? Beautiful. We've got very creative people. This one, warrior helmet? Perfect. Perfect. You're from the 17th century. I can make out. Right? Anyone drew something similar to this? Star Wars? No Star Wars fans? No? Okay. So someone asked me a question for who? So did you draw this for yourself or for someone else? Did you have someone else in mind? Yourselves? Okay. It's good. Yeah, self-preservation, take care of yourself, very important before you can take care of others, right? Wear your own mask, stop screaming, then the person sitting next to you. So let's take this a notch further, right? Let's create this for someone else, right? Let's create a persona, right? And before you imagine your own persona, let me guide you towards something, right? Ask yourself, who is this helmet for, right? And this is for the future human, okay? 100 years from now, it's a helmet if you were alive as you are today, which no one will be. 100 years from now, for yourself, or for any human, or for your friend, right? I want you to sketch, all of you can sketch better than me, trust me, a persona, right? 100 years from now, how would I look? Old, but if I were to look the same, maybe I won't have my glasses, but, right? This is an activity, so you'll have to stop looking at me and look at your notes, your paper. You have 30 seconds, right? And after that, we'll do a round of introductions of everyone, and we can all go home. Right? We'll be done. Very fast sketches. Front row students. Beautiful. So 100 years from now, right? How would a human look like? Very similar. I think many of you are faster sketchers than I am, right? So the way I imagined it when I did this a couple of days ago was I figured we'd have larger brains, right? Because everything is cerebral. We've stopped hunting for rabbits. We've stopped farming. We're going to grow potatoes on Earth, right? And so So our brains are larger, right, are going to be larger. Our eyes are going to be bigger because, your fingers are itching. You want to open your iPhone and your touch screen and you want to do this, right? LinkedIn, etc., which is good. But we need eyes to be evolved to process more information because, we'll have ear implants and, plugins. You can't see, so you don't need earlobes, right? Food is going to be, I imagine food will be in biscuits, right? Tablets, perfect. It'll be a balanced nutrition, right? You don't need to eat meat, vegetables, nothing. Everything is artificially created. You probably don't even need teeth, right? It'll just melt in your mouth, right? And you probably smell everything. You don't need nostrils, right? You're not hunting anymore. So our brains become larger, nostrils smaller, eyes larger, and this is us 100 years from now, right? Hollywood has created this image of an alien in your minds, right? This is an alien, but no, this is you and me. Maybe not 100 years, maybe 1,000 years, right? There's this warp worm. What do you call that? Yeah. So we keep visiting us from the future, right? That's what Hollywood has created an impression, right? Did your personas look similar to this? Yes? 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 No? Not. But why? I mean, everybody agreed with me. You all nodded your heads. Why is it different? How are you going to go back and convince your people that I want a helmet for this person, and they're going to ask who, and then you're going to say, this is you 100 years from now, right? And they're going to go crazy, right? And they're going to go crazy because they probably don't have the context, right? So what are we missing here? Let's pause and think. What are we missing here? Futuristic? No, your brains are wired. Hollywood has created that image of an alien. Okay, you already have preconceived notions, right? But equally, how are you going to convince them that that's who you are? You've created a great persona, right? A small thing, and you've posted it somewhere, or you've written it. You've created one, crazy Kuru, right? That's the persona you've created, right? But how are you going to empathize with this person? How are you going to understand this person's emotions? Right? Where did they come from? What did they do? Where are they today? Where will they be tomorrow? Right? And that's where storytelling comes in, right? Because, essentially, if I were to put context to my drawing, my persona, 2122 Earth is, inhabitable, right? We're planning to go to Mars. Thank God Elon Musk is there, right? The Falcon comes back, right? Doesn't get destroyed, right? But equally, we've ruined our planets, right? And planet, not S. I beg your pardon. And the only other people are smarter than us, who are the robos, right? So when I go and say I'm heading to Mars, the robo says you'll need a helmet, right? So essentially, what I've done is I've created the context, right? And I've created a conflict, right? And I've short-circuited it because I wanted to do it in threes. I've created a resolution saying, I've resolved to a solution saying that I need a helmet, right? To travel to Mars, and you know what? I'm going to pick up Darth Vader's helmet, right? Because it's tested, tried, right? So telling stories is very powerful to convince people. Not just to convince, but to essentially communicate, right? So stories gives you context, it helps the other person visualize, right? It helps understand their feelings, right? Emotions, empathize with them, and the reason why they want to do things, right? So it gives them, it gives you intent and helps you communicate, right? I'm not going to cover the art of storytelling, right? Because you can go to the internet, LinkedIn Learning, wherever, you can spend hours, you'll learn it, your team will learn it. It's not rocket science, right? But is that enough? Is storytelling enough, right? Is just telling the context enough? Is it enough to tell someone how someone feels, right? Yeah, sure, you can tell me how you feel, but if I don't do anything about it, if I don't solve your problem, it's only half. It's a good beginning, it's a great start, but it's only half the problem solved, right? So let's unpack the next step, which is to start thinking about what's the answer to these questions, right? And you've all heard of design thinking, right? And you know the design thinking workshop, right? Where and I resonate with this because I'm an engineer. It's one of my favorite Dilbert strips, right? You go to a room, it's fancy, you've got all these post-its across the wall, you're excited, you don't have to do your work today, yeah, tomorrow's another day, right? And they ask you for insights and all you can see is yellow, right? But that's just the design thinking workshop, right? I want you to understand that design thinking is far greater, because if you really want to build a product, if you really want to solve someone's problem, you need to think deeper, right? So design thinking, you have textbook definitions, multiple of it, but for me there are three things that stand out when you talk about design thinking as a process, right? It is still a process, but I like to think of it as a journey. It's a journey you're taking with different other people, right, in your organization, maybe outside your organization as well, right? One is you're trying to use speed to your advantage, right? You're going to rapidly create something that is customer-centric, right? And you're going to come up with an innovative way of solving a problem, right? That's what design thinking helps. It gives you that structure, right? I'm going to quickly cover the 4 steps that I believe are there. There's a step before where you find the right people. But essentially, you want to define, redefine, restate the problem, right? So that you understand the problem better. You understand the user better, you understand the problem better, and you want to start empathizing. You want to discover more, you want to empathize with the person you're going to solve the problem for, right? So you're gathering data, you're gathering insights, you're observing people, right? And then you ideate, you come together. That's the design thinking workshop that most of us are familiar with, right? But there's a lot of work that happens before that. It starts with the story, right? So it helps you prioritize your solutions. It gives you an opportunity to come together, different people, right? My helmet is different from yours, right? So different ideas coming together. Obviously, there'll be a little bit of friction, but if you're open, it'll all be good. And then an opportunity to rapidly build a prototype and validate it, right? Validation is super important, right? And then you can get into build faster, right? I want to walk you through this journey with an example, right? And you can obviously try and relate it to your industry, to your situation, right? In the last half of 2019, right? I'd gone through this whole design thinking journey with the retailer, and we'd come up with a prototype, right? And we validated it. It was great, right? But suddenly it became larger than life, right? Everybody wanted it. We did a great job of marketing it internally, which is really important, right? And suddenly it became that investor day, they wanted to demo it, right? So on a Sunday morning, 7 a.m., I was asked to come into the store and demo it, right? I was with the store operations director, right? So, investor day, a lot of people come in, and, so I just, Sunday morning, I wake up early, and then, pretty much dressed like this, I rock up to the store, right? I rock up at 6:57 right? Just 3 minutes. I'm still thinking I have enough time to use the restroom. And then I see the store operations director's face, right? And he's like, finally you're here, right? And he's with this gentleman, he's walking him through the store and saying, I've done this, I've done this, we've done this, we've done that, right? So I go quickly set everything up. Luckily, I have people to help me as well, right? And there's this person who comes, his name is Archie Norman. I don't know how many of you have heard of Archie Norman. Archie Norman is, he transformed Asda in the UK in the late 90s. He made it profitable. He made it the second largest retailer in the UK. So he was chairman of Asda. He was a member of parliament. And then he was a shadow minister. And then he was heading Sainsbury after that. He was heading M&S, and he was a advisor to the board of directors, right? I had absolutely no idea who this guy was, right? So I'm standing there, and they're presenting, this is what we did, and he asks a very simple question, right? You're in a grocery store. How many of you have not been to a grocery store? Everybody's been to a grocery store. So products don't magically appear the next day, right? If it's out of stock, right? There's a whole process behind it. Supply chain, warehouse, or DC sends those products in like big pallets, right? And they have to put it into smaller trolleys because you have to take it out into the aisles, right? So this whole process was taking a lot of time, a lot of money, and people were getting frustrated, right? So we thought we'd come up with a solution. And Archie Norman asked this question to the store operations director. He said, but why didn't you get supply chain to send you in trolleys in the first place, right? And I'm looking at this Nathan. Nathan is the director of store operations. And I can see his face turn from white to a shade of pink to red, right? All within a fraction of seconds, right? And he looks at me, and I'm grinning from ear to ear. And I'm grinning from ear to ear because I knew we'd covered that question during our design thinking session, right? We'd unpacked it, we'd understood why, right? The point is that design thinking helps you do that. It helps you, it's a process that helps you understand, define, discover, observe, right? Ask those questions during ideation and come up with a solution that's really innovative and creative, right? So let me quickly walk you through how we define the problem. These are pallets, these are boxes, they get into roll cages. There's no robot doing this, right? There are real people, right? The splitter, there are around 1,000 stores, right? And each store, there's a splitter. He or she knows the store in the back of their mind, right? Or they think they know the store, right? The layout, the products keep changing every week, every fortnight, right? And so it's very human dependent. And also there's a filler, right? Who takes this roll cage out and fills, right? The problem everybody started was with this $250 million problem for around 1,000 stores, right? That's their annual spend, right? But when we started looking at emotions and when we started looking at people, that's when we realized that the problem is far greater. If this person doesn't turn up, the whole store is gone for a toss. And mind you, this happens night. It's called night fill, right? So this is a crazy thing that goes on in every store, right? And of course, these splitters are all new because these fillers are all new because there's so much churn in that industry, right? You've got part-time folks coming in, they don't know the layout of the store, etc., right? So first, we defined that the problem is not about reducing cost; it's about improving their lives as well, right? And ultimately improving customer experience. Right? So that's how you start defining a problem. Right? You get a better understanding. Then you start to do what is the most ideal thing to do, which is to observe people in their environment, right? In Lean, it's called Gemba. So we did that, and it was a distributed team. There was a team on site, but also in Bangalore we had a team as well, right? It was really hard to get everyone engaged at the same time and at the same level of understanding, but at the same level of understanding emotions, right? And intent, right? Why are we doing this? Whom are we doing this for? How are their lives, right? 22 years, someone's gone day in and out into the back room of a store, and they don't get paid great, right? And they're doing this from memory, right? So when we started speaking to them, the splitting was about speed, okay? This person was operating from muscle memory, right? And when we started speaking to fillers, they were like, I'm lost, I'm going up and down the aisle, right? This is so frustrating, right? So you start building a story around that, you start empathizing, you look at emotions, what's their journey, etc., right? So these are different tools you have at your disposal during this whole process, right? And then observations, you start collecting data, right? At least enough data to then get into an ideation stage, right? So we went through that, and then we did an off-site ideation session across workshop, design thinking workshops across 2 days. We brought in the users, right? It's really important to get the right team in place, right? You obviously want the users, right? Do not second guess users, right? We do that all the time, right? We've got, okay, I think I know how a grocery store works, right? I think I know how a bank works. I've gone to a teller, right? I've gone to my relationship manager. But please do not second guess your user. This is absolutely critical, right? So we brought in the splitters, we brought in the fillers, right? We brought in the store manager because he or she has to manage something larger, right? Then we brought in the IT business analyst because obviously everything runs on software, right? This is a completely manual process. But our hypothesis was that you have to have some sort of system to support this work, right? So we brought them in, we took them away from their environment because it helps to sort of, leave work behind and sort of be in a different environment, right? And we did this ideation workshop, come up with ideas. We did all the techniques you'll learn. You can go online and search for techniques. There's like hundreds of people telling you the same thing, right? So we created a hypothesis, and the hypothesis essentially, the solution is not important, right? It was using a device, an app, right? But it wasn't enough building an app, right? Because these people who work in store told us, I don't have time to look at the app, right? So we had to build both visual and audio cues, right? So that was our first problem. The second problem was, I need my hands to be free, right? So the retailer had tried different solutions before, right? Right from augmented reality headsets, right? This was not done with design thinking. This was done by asking your offshore team to say, hey, give me a solution for this problem, right? And I don't blame them absolutely, right? You take the best technology, right, and you solve today's problem, right? You lose the context, you lose the emotion, you lose the idea of how does a back room look like? Dark, dingy, right? Cold, sometimes too hot, right? Everything spread across, right? You can't find things. So it's important to understand what's going on. And because we had a distributed team, we started recording videos, right? We recorded videos, we uploaded them, and a lot of the work was done by them, right? For example, if I go back to this data points, right? We didn't have this data. This data wasn't captured because there's no device. You're not recording how many cartons you're opening up, right? They watched the videos and they said, they watched several videos and they said, this is the average, right? So there's many ways both parties, onshore and offshore, can be all taken on the same journey at the same time. It's hard, right? I'm not going to lie to you. It was extremely hard. But you have to do it. You have to find creative ways of doing it, right? So then, so once we started building this out, we had these users to help us. Then we prioritized, 2x2 metrics. Everybody knows that, right? Cost should be low, benefits should be high, blah, blah, blah. And then we came up with a hypothesis, right? We said the problem was not in the filling, which was taking a lot of the money and the time, but the problem was in splitting, right? Because it was further down. Actually, the problem is in supply chain, but we covered that because the supply chain director said, over my dead body, right? He said, wait for 2 years, my DC will get automated, right? But $250 million odd, I'm just making this up, much more, was a lot of money to leave on the table every year, right? Imagine 1%, 2%, 10%, right? That's a lot of money. But more importantly for me, the thing was 2 years of user suffering, right? 2 years of people suffering. I mean, we've got brilliant technology today, but why do we want our people to suffer, right? So that's where design thinking comes in. It's very easy to look at value in terms of dollars, in terms of numbers, but the value is much more, right? It's for your users, right? So our hypothesis was a better split will give an improved fill, right? And we had to test this hypothesis because technology is really hard, it's expensive, right? So the leadership team said, all this is great, but how do I know it'll work, right? So we did what I'd call a paper prototype. And you may have heard this, it's very easy or relatively easier to do it when you're building an app, when you have to draw screens, or even if you have to mock up screens, it's quite easier. But we have process, and you'll have this in, you can relate this back to your industry. You'll have process, right? You'll have devices that some people need to use, right? You'll have service, right? You'll have customer service, and you'll have an app maybe, or a website, whatever it is, right? So how do you bring all that together? How do you do that on a paper is really hard, right? So, so we printed out the layout of an aisle. We went to a store. It was like a night at the museum, right? We were trying to use pen and paper or a printed thing to sort out what should go in that trolley that goes into the aisle, right? And there are people who are working in the store and they're coming, look at these idiots running around, right? I mean, really, we were running around like headless chickens because we didn't know how exactly to do it, right? That's when you start appreciating what these people do. And they're like, I can't believe you get paid so much for doing this, right? You don't even know how to do anything properly. But it was a full night in the back room, and we did filling as well, and we had to measure, right? So again, video, record, go through the video, see how long it takes, where did you go wrong, how are you lifting those boxes, right? No, you have to go down and lift, right? So all of those things started coming in, and MBF is manual brute force. That's what we used, right? But the interesting thing was it did improve fill times, right? But it also gave us another insight, which is your split time cannot reduce. You'll have to split at the same speed, the muscle memory that your splitter has, right? How do you do that? How do you do that wearing Google glasses? You can't, right? It won't even recognize products, right? But these were great insights, right? Validation is really, really important, right? Because you've created a persona or a representative persona of who the user is, right? When you start validating, it's important to make sure that you pick the right person, right? We were not the right people. So we had enough proof to go back and get funding for proof of concept, right? So we went back. So the whole process, if you remember, there's a loop that goes back, right? So we went back to do a little bit more discovery because we wanted more data on what device to select, right? Do we do it with integrated data, or do we do it static data, right? And then, so we engaged a group of people outside of the core team, right? So we got in legal, right? Very important when you're dealing with a workforce, right? We got in human factors, right? Because people actually lift weights, and there's a lot of that going on. Human resources, because you're now going to pay people differently because their work may be faster or take more time, right? So all of these people, your non-core team is really important, right? So we got them in, and then we started doing all this, and someone said, I want this to work for the entire store, right? In a proof of concept, right? So education is important, saying a proof of concept is a representative proof of concept, right? It doesn't have to work for everyone, right? It doesn't have to work throughout, as long as you can prove that it can work, right? So again, research was all done by the offshore team, right? And recommended what device to choose, more data collection, how should the data come in, all of this was done by them, right? So there's a lot you can do by not being there as well, as long as you work together as a team and you have an understanding, right? And then we defined a new process, and this is where users came in, right? So this guy is looking at this process and saying, great, but after I split the cages better, how do I know which cage goes in tomorrow? I know it, but how does someone else know? Because now that person is empathizing about fillers, right? So we had to go back and say, okay, we have to put tags, red, amber, green. Green means it goes now, amber means it goes out tomorrow, and red means it goes out 4 or 5 days later, because stock doesn't sell the same way, right? But it comes in early, right? So we started validating, and this is when we started measuring, right? One thing I'd like to share is, in April, I went with my family to Goa. So I reach the airport, and there's this lady who comes in and says, sir, I'd like to offer you, priority check-in, right? And the first question I have is it free, right? Like everybody else. She said, no, it's absolutely free, and then you can come, and we have this, I didn't know what it was. She didn't give me the answer, but she said, stand in front of this machine, right? Then I realized, I saw a board that says your face is your boarding pass, right, or whatever. So I'm standing, she says, remove your glasses, remove your mask. It does 2-3 things, and she says it's okay. Then my wife comes in, and she's smarter than me, so she's got everything ready, and she's smart. Then she takes a few seconds. Then this lady says, no, now your son, right? He's 6.5, and he's standing there. He's also smarter than me, so he's removed his mask. Everything is standing there. That machine doesn't go below this for him, right? So his face can't be scanned. So she says, oh, great, but we'll have to now go through the normal process, right? Like, fantastic. That's why you reach airports early, right? I started thinking, right, what went wrong, right? The people who do the validation, or who are responsible to do the validation, have to understand as well who the representative user is, right? It's probably me traveling alone, trying to catch a flight in a hurry, right? So it's important to understand that. And it's important to then make sure that you're testing it using the right people first, right? And we started measuring, because now we had a device that would capture everything, right? So we started measuring everything, and we did a worst case. It's not right, good to call it worst case, so we said base case, right? And best case, right? So the idea is, even you need to be a little paranoid, right? I am very paranoid, which is bad. But you need to be a little paranoid and say, if it doesn't work perfectly, what are the benefits that I'm going to get, right? What's the user going to get? What's the value going to be? This is really important, right? Because what you'll see is this drives your business case as well, right? And then, more importantly, you have to measure emotions and experience, right? So you start measuring, what are they feeling? What are your users telling you, right? Is it great? Is it not great, right? Are there still tweaks that you can do, right? Because it's really important. And then we started doing emotions, right? If you remember the last one, it was all going down. This was slightly better, right? And then the benefits, there's more benefits than what you possibly can imagine to begin with, right? In this example, the human factors person came in, looked at this during the demo and said, hey, you're making this guy scan the cartons, every single cartons, right? And then her face just lit up. And I asked why, and she said, now I can start measuring how much a person is lifting per shift, per hour, right? And that's invaluable because I don't want to get into trouble. We don't want to get into trouble by making people overwork, exert too much, because we are also concerned about their health, right? So there are these myriad of additional benefits that you can potentially think of, and you think of it because you've gone through this process, but you've also engaged the right set of people, right? I can only build helmets that are Star Wars, right? I've never driven a motorcycle, right? I have, but I didn't wear a helmet that time, right? And then you can start building your business case. You can start building a business case that's far more detailed than what it was before, right? You can tweak experiences to make it better, right? And nothing in this world runs without technology. So the advantage here was we did something and we figured out what the architecture should look like, right? This gives you a platform. It cuts away several months of hardening sprints, preparation sprints. If you're using Agile or if you're doing some research, it cuts away a lot of those time, right? And it gives leadership the confidence to invest, right? Because a lot of cases, if you don't go through this design thinking process and try to do your digital transformation, and you end up with a POC, straight dive into the POC, a lot of cases, the POC fails, right? You can't really get to show the benefits. So let's pause and think a little, right? I've talked you through a real example, how challenging it was, but I want you to start thinking, so what are the key takeaways, right? I've captured 10 here, right? And these are, the number one is you have to have the right team, the right mindset, because robots are not building. This is not Elon Musk's factory, right? This is your workplace. You have people, right? And you're dealing with people. People also have emotions, right? Mind, I said also, right? People have emotions and they have feelings, right? And you want to get the right people with the right experience, with the right mindset, right? You want to clear their minds, right? That's why we got people out of the stores, out of their head offices, so that they're in a different environment, they're free to think, right? And that's when you start to come up with crazy ideas. By the way, we had, in the offshore, we had graduates come and join the team as well, right? Extended team. I mean, the ideas were crazy, right? They were the ones who said, why are we solving this here? We should solve it in supply chain, right? Have the right mix of people. It's important to find the right balance because design thinking is very hands-on, right? You don't want to have all managers, right? And you don't want to have all workers, right? You need to find the balance. Executive sponsorship goes without saying. So it's important to have that as well. And then you have to trust the process, right? You have to get your team to trust the process. And they won't trust until you trust the process, right? So I have to trust the design thinking process because there were many times before ideation and even after ideation where I asked myself every night, will this work tomorrow, right? My first demo, I couldn't even, my hands were shaking because, I don't know if it's going to work, right? So, and that's a normal feeling, right? You're agitated, you're anxious, right? But that's a very normal feeling because you don't know, right? But the process will tell you, right? There have been so many failures and you learn from your failures. I wouldn't call it failures, I'd call it learnings. You know one more way where it's not going to work, right? An MUP mindset is a minimum usable product, right? So when you're doing validation, think of only a minimum usable product, right? If I go back to that Face ID, it was a minimum usable product, right? It's just that you have to select the right users to validate it. The last two are my favorite, design thinking whisperer. And I came across this name in a funny way. There was an email that someone had sent saying, hey, I spoke to Kuru, the digital transformation whisperer, right? And I was like, hold on a second, is that a new title, right? It's not. It's just that someone who can, in your organization, understand design thinking, who's been through the journey, who can calm nerves, right? Because it's new for everyone, right? It's a lot of change. You need to hear that voice that says, follow the process, trust it, it's going to work. If it doesn't work, you would have learned something, right? And your leadership is there to support you, right? And DT is a key part of DT. Is design thinking is so integral to a digital transformation, right? So it's very important to get it right. And of course, distributed design thinking requires a lot of effort. It can be done, right? So measuring impact, we measured impact of the solution, but how do you measure the impact of the design thinking process itself, right? Because you have these different phases. Imagine it's a funnel, right? And your investment is going to keep going as you go through this funnel. As an idea, as a problem becomes an idea and goes through this funnel, you're going to invest more and more money, right? There's going to be abandonment at some point, right? Not everything will work, right? So you tend to have low abandonment when you're defining the problem, right? If someone say it's not even a problem because, you know what, it's not 250 million, it's 25 million, right? But that's only one dimension, because the problem could be experience, right? What your people are going through. And if you start to see very high POC, proof of concept failures, it means you're not tightening the belt around create and validate, right? That's what it means. So you should start to see a higher degree of ideas eliminated during create and validate if you've done the process right, right? But if you still fail at a POC, it may mean that you need to go and do the discovery better. You haven't understood your users, right? So this is just to set things in context, because as leaders or executioners, as you go through this exercise, it's important to understand this, the dynamics of this, right? Measuring, there are two measurements that are important, right? Quantitative and qualitative, right? I'm not going to prescribe what measures are good for you, for your organization, for your industry. But remember, speed is super important, right? Ideation to implementation, right? How much is this time, right? The faster you go through this, the better it is, right? Throughput as a percentage, or you could call it success as a percentage, is probably misleading, right? Because if you say at the time of defining the problem, right, to the time it takes to go through this, what's the success rate? Success rate or throughput rate is something that you will achieve, or you will achieve through experience. You'll realize what's the right throughput for your situation, right? So it's a little tricky. Faster throughput doesn't necessarily mean you're successful, right? And then the last one is obviously value, right? Value is not, in my opinion, it's an important measure because you need to sell the idea of design thinking. End of the day, you know, someone in finance is going to look at your books, right? So value is important. It's not a perfect measure, and I'll tell you why it's not a perfect measure in a second. The other important one are qualitative measures, right? Feedback from the users, right? How do they feel about this now? Do they feel better? Do they feel more confident? Are they happy about it? Try to start rating your proof of concepts, right? How would you rate it on a scale of 1 to 5, right? It could be rated by the people who actually do it, right? And it could be rated by users. It could be rated by others, right? After using it or trying it. And then this impressions, right? How many likes did you get, right? What kind, was it a heart, was it a thumbs up, right? We lived in a LinkedIn world, right? So what are some guiding principles for measures? I think this is really important, right? You're looking at outcomes, right? And to drive outcomes, you need to encourage the right type of behaviors, right? So if you look at your design thinking team that you put together, it's going to be different from each design thinking exercise that you do, right? So, but behaviors the behaviors you need to encourage are going to be similar. So then think of what metrics should I measure people on, right? And some of the must-have is you should, the measures or the things that you're going to, the metrics need to actually encourage a certain desired behavior, right? It should be simple, unambiguous. You should be able to communicate it across your organization. It has to be consistent. More importantly, people should be in control of those measures, right? I feel I should be able to influence that measure. That's why I said value is tricky, right? You may have to do a design thinking and a proof of concept of a blockchain solution, which may not actually be, you may not have book value, it may have a future value, right? It may be negative, it may be a sunk investment for now. But if you start measuring people saying, okay, without looking at the context and say, oh, the value that this team has delivered is negative, it's really hard, it's demoralizing, right? So that's why this measure is important but tricky, right? And more importantly, illustrate what happened and inform what to do next, right? As a user, as a part of the team, I need to understand what I did and what I should do next, right? So that's what it's important. We're almost out of time. I'll promise this is the last slide. You're probably wondering, how do I bring in a culture of design thinking, right? It's important to step back and say what defines a culture, right? Culture is something that you practice. These are things that you believe in, right? So practice and belief contributes to culture. And in order to believe and practice something, you need to have a mindset. So in your organization, you need to build a mindset. How do you build a mindset, right? You go back and you share what others have done outside the organization, what people have done inside the organization, right? Give them the confidence, bring in that mindset, right? And it starts with education, right? You have to educate people on design thinking, so on and so forth. Let me explain this to you a little bit with an analogy, right? So at home, you've got phones, you've got so many devices, but maybe let's say you want to, at dinner, you want everyone to sit down, undistracted, have a conversation, have a family time, right? So you say, it's important, you tell your children it's important to not be meddling with your phones, you need to sit down, let's talk, right? So you're educating your child and yourself, right? And you're sharing stories, this is what my friend's family does and it works really well, they have this nice conversation, so you're sharing stories and values, right? And you're building a mindset, right? Now your child or your children think that it's important, right? Hard, but they'll eventually get there. But imagine if you don't give an opportunity to practice, right? So for example, in 7 days in a week, you do this only once, or you don't do it at all. There's no chance to practice. There's no chance to build this culture of, getting to the dinner table, switching off your phones, right, and having a conversation, right? So if you want to build this culture, it's important that you practice it first, but you also start with educate, share, build that mindset, and very important, to give them a chance to practice. Otherwise, you're not going to build that culture. I'll stop talking because it's been a monologue, and we have a few minutes. We can chat offline as well. But are there any questions? Yes.
What are the key challenges you faced while implementing the design thinking culture within the organization?
Yeah. Good question, hard question. The biggest challenge is the mindset, and it's especially the conflict that happens between financial results versus actual results, right? There's an expectation that you're going to save a lot of money or you're going to bring in a lot of revenue, right? And a lot of the times the question is, I want to see the proof of how it's going to be, right? Business cases, right? When you build a business case, right? It's very, some clients, some cultures in the organization, they may agree to a business case if it has X amount of data, right? I have worked with clients who spent 3 months validating a business case, right? And the way I had to overcome that was I said, I've used Markov chains to figure out, the variance and all of that, right? The probability. And they accepted it, right? I did use Markov chains in Excel, but it didn't give me a better result. So your biggest challenge is people will understand, right? The people who are in the design thinking, once they get into it, they'll understand, they'll love it, right? But it's people outside of that core and that extended group that don't understand it. And that is where your challenge comes in. The answer is you need to have evangelists at all levels within your organization who can spread the word, right? And then you'll automatically see people buying in. It's a different culture shift, right? Yes.
I think you gave a classic example of solving a problem, right?
Yes.
So if you want to apply this to something, you gave an example of 100 years down the line.
Yeah.
It's a problem you are envisaging. You don't have
Yes.
your users or your
Yes.
thing. So do you see challenges
Yes.
applying this there?
Yes. I do see a variation of this in applying, right? Because we've used this process to build solutions that will, or to address solutions we imagine will be there in the future. We've also been forced to use design thinking for a problem that's not there, right? Because you want to get ahead of the market, right? Build me a blockchain solution, blah, 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 right? The challenge is, again, the same thing that you can get the users today, but you will have to ask them to imagine how their world will be, right? There's no easy way to do this. You will have to seed some ideas, right? You'll have to incept the idea, right? I incepted the idea that you're going to look like aliens 100 years from now, right? So you'll have to do a little bit of balancing. Not too much, because you don't want to say, oh, I've done some research and 10 years down the line, all cars are going to be electric cars, right? So that's not inception, that's like brainwashing, right? So you'll have to find a balance. I'm afraid there's no silver bullet, right? Each situation, industry is different.
Hello. Yeah. Awesome session, by the way. I had open innovation for one of the large Australian retailer. The happy problem, like Kohli faces once in a while, is I have too many use cases from across the organization. So I love the way it is getting structured, so we solve important, big enough problems actually, but this innovation role is a little tricky. It is also managing stakeholders, perceptions and all. 2 questions. How can I safely, the word used very carefully, safely manage the expectations when it comes to which use case prioritization and all? Second one, can this be expedited? Because exactly the same GCC setup, we are here in India and in Melbourne, some store, too many stakeholders when we talk about it. Is there a way we can factory model design thinking, if you will?
So your first question is probably the easier one, right? Your stakeholders will come and some of them will be very loud, right? No, blockchain is the future, I want that now, right? I want it now. So if you ask the question, okay, we can do it in 8 weeks. No, I wanted it yesterday. What are you guys talking about, right? And that is going to create a conflict, right? The conflict can be resolved to some extent by emotionally showing yourself up, right? And saying that, look, I have 100 of these ideas. Here is my prioritization Excel. This is the formula I have used, and yours is coming at the bottom, right? And therefore, I have all these other stakeholders I have to deal with, right? It's like standing at Starbucks and your coffee machine isn't working, and everybody's like, "Where's my coffee?" Hold on a second. There's 2 people who ordered it before. I need to give them their coffee first, right? So it's not easy, but that's the answer, right? There will be cases where the CEO calls you and says, "Pick up that blockchain." Damn it, right? You'll have to compromise on some of your principles at that time, but you'll have to go back and empathize and tell the other person whose innovation solution isn't coming to say, "I'm sorry," right? The second question, sorry.
We call it the pantheon world. Everyone is a god, so I cannot easily get back.
Yes, that's going to be an even harder challenge, right? So 2 things to apply there. One is the value, right? You can get these futuristic solutions on value and say there's no perceived value today, tomorrow, maybe 3 years down the line. We don't know how the technology is going to change. And experience, right? I have problems to solve today that I need to focus on because there's a big experience problem coming in, right? So that's another way to do it. And I forgot your second question answering.
Factory model of design
Factory
thinking.
model, yes. Factory model will come in automatically on its own. Don't try to engineer design thinking too much, right? Follow the process, trust the process. It will vary, right? There are instances where you may pick up a failed proof of concept and trust all the defined data and research that's been done, but you may not have had the right people in the room to ideate, right? So that's a different way of doing it, right? You can classify projects that you do, right? You can separate an app development from a process and an app development from a service development, and say, some things are more complicated, so they take X amount of time, right? Validation in some cases will take 4 weeks, in some cases it will take 8 weeks, right? I've done this very simple thing of putting that in an Excel sheet and then saying, when a new project comes in, when a new design thinking problem comes in, where do I slot it, right? But let the process define it. Don't try to. My recommendation is don't try to do an Elon Musk here, right? Thank you, thanks, and thanks for staying back. Right? Thank you. Thanks.